Good evening. I'd like to call the City Council adjourned meeting of Monday, August 21st, 2017 to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Albertson?
Here.
Bueller? Absent. Danforth?
Here.
Lallam?
Here.
Roby? Absent. Solem?
Here.
Thorson?
Here.
Vilhauer?
Here.
Why?
Present.
Thank you.
Okay, the first item on the agenda is approval of the consent agenda, and I would like to note I handed out a revised item D listing. There was one name left off, and so the two names that we're correcting from the original one in your packet are highlighted.
I'll make a move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion by Danforth and a second by Lallam to approve the consent agenda. Any discussion?
I do have one question. 1B, the ambulance write-offs. Why that amount is really low compared to what it typically is? Do we change the way we do something, or?
It's not an ambulance. It's a street sign repair.
My bad.
Nope.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Okay. Second item is approval of the agenda.
So move.
Second.
Moved by Vilhauer, second by Thorson. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Okay. Item 3, second reading of ordinance number 17-25, amending chapter 21.77 of the revised ordinances of the City of Watertown regarding wireless telecommunications towers and facilities. Justin will take this, and I'll go ahead and open the public hearing.
Thank you, Mayor. The genesis behind the suggested revisions to Chapter 2177 are collection of federal regulations that are a little over 5 years old. These regulations modified and instituted a more aggressive, what they call in the industry, shot clock for approving requests to site facilities, wireless facilities on existing wireless telecommunications towers, as well as for putting up new standalone wireless towers. So what this ordinance attempts to do is to make sure that our process, which needs to be accountable to federal law, fully comports with federal law. And that's what a good chunk of this ordinance does. Other provisions within this ordinance relate to ensuring that the themes in our zoning ordinance are carried out in this particular ordinance regarding wireless telecommunications towers. Specifically, there are modifications made to denote that stealth design needs to be a part of the facilities that are to be attached to structures or to wireless towers themselves. The idea behind stealth design is that designers of these facilities need to put some thought into making these facilities aesthetically, if not pleasing, then certainly at least not gaudy and an eyesore, that they at least attempt to blend into the surrounding development. Moreover, there is a concern, obviously, about these types of facilities being located in certain zoning districts that are sensitive to this kind of development, namely your residential areas, as well as some of the exceptions that are denoted here. If you look on the first section, 217701, sub 5, you have the zoning districts where these facilities would not be able to be placed. The idea here is not to put inordinate restrictions on wireless telecommunications facilities. They are an important component of modern living. The objective here is to merely ensure that our sensitive zoning districts are respected, that there be an additional consideration put out there for adjacent landowners, and that otherwise we fully comport with federal law. Those really are the two values that animate these revisions. So I'd be happy to answer specific questions.
Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak about this? Seeing none, I will go ahead and close the public hearing and entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Moved by Danforth and second by Thorson. Is there any further discussion? I would like to point out that although the Board of Adjustment and the administrative official won't be able to approve any application in the residential zoning districts that are listed, or PUD, or the Gateway, or the Business Park, C1, RG, all those districts, they can't approve it, but they could always, someone could come to the council and directly request your permission.
Correct. Yeah, that would be similar to the council's ability to waive the application of our ordinances in select circumstances that it always has.
Any other further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, saying nay. Motion carries. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the first reading of ordinance number 17-32, amending section 21.6303 of the revised ordinance of the City of Watertown to allow for less restrictions on loading docks in the I-1 zoning districts. And this originated with me. The Plan Commission considered this and did not approve the change. It was a tie vote which failed. So for the council to approve this would require 2/3 majority instead of a simple majority. Rob, did you want to talk about this a little bit? We're going to have this item on a work session so we can dig in and look at the meat of it. But Rob Peterson is here to talk about it.
Thank you, Mayor. Rob Peterson, Glacial Lakes Rubber and Plastics. Many of you know that I started a manufacturing company here a few years ago to help offset the jobs that were lost from the Minnesota rubber plant being removed from the city. I view this as an important building block for the city to help businesses grow and expand. We've expanded our business once already, moving into a much larger building. That building needs to be expanded again. And to help us continue to grow and be efficient, I'm looking for that ability to be able to put in a dock that faces the street. And I don't feel like doing that in an I-1 zone that is an industrial park east of the interstate, a couple hundred yards or a couple hundred feet, I should say, off of the road, is really something that should be impeding businesses to grow and expand and do things like that. So I'm biased on this one, but I think it's important for the city as well to help those businesses grow and expand and continue to build in the right direction, to have this this ability to use a dock in the right way, in the right zones. So I completely understand where the ordinance came from, why it's there, not wanting to have big trucks blocking streets and things like that. But I mean, in an industrial park where that's the type of business that is being conducted, I don't see that this really needs to be in effect anymore. So I'm in support of this. And I think a lot of business owners and a lot of manufacturers would be in support of this initiative.
I was at the meeting, the Board of Adjustment meeting for this. I agree with you. You should probably have one. The problem they had was the fact that there is a lot of I-1, if you could bring that up, that's joining residential. Problem is they didn't want to make a broad sweep that could have a loading dock facing someone's house. So they were more apt to leave it the way it was, one-on-one basis type thing.
Well, maybe there's an opportunity to modify it so that industrial parks in specific areas are taken out of or exempted from it or something like that. I don't know what the answer there is, but, the city of Watertown, as a community, we have touted for years that we want to be business friendly and work with, businesses to grow and expand our community. I think this is going to be an important one as we do that.
Sarah, in a conversation you and I had earlier on this topic, I believe you had mentioned that this is an item that is not allowed by ordinance to have a variance granted for. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So the lack of support from the current plan commission isn't that they can't, it's that these concerns that Brad had mentioned, correct? So my question for you is, can we change our ordinance language to allow variances under certain conditions here? Or why is this particular one item not able to have a variance granted for when we have a whole host of other things? Does anybody know that?
Variances are given for things that you can measure. This doesn't fall under the listing of things that we can grant a variance for, but earlier today, Justin and I had a conversation about the meaning of the ordinance, and I think that we could clarify our ordinance so that it's at least more understandable. And I think this is a perfect example of an ordinance which, could be revised to facilitate development and still meet the requirements that we need it to meet and satisfy safety and aesthetics in a way. So I think it's a good opportunity. An applicant such as Rob always has the ability to come before the council to ask for relief from an ordinance requirement, but that's cumbersome and time consuming. If we could rewrite it to be clear and still satisfy the goals of our zoning ordinance, then people would know up front, and it would be easier to just do a development with a building permit. You come in, you comply, you get your building permit, you build, instead of having to go through a timely process. So that's what I'm hoping to do. If this takes us too long and Rob ends up ready to apply for his building permit, he can come straight to you and ask for relief from the ordinance requirement. Meanwhile, I would like to rewrite this in a way that is more facilitating of our industrial developments, because the last thing we want to do is just hassle developers and make it hard for them to do what they need to do to expand in our community.
Mayor, a couple questions. You and I had a conversation during the brief break. I guess I want to make sure I understand. Okay, this is the first reading. Your suggestion would take it back to a work session in 2 weeks. I'm not opposed to that. I mean, we're getting things out of normal chain of events here. We can do that. We can go from a first reading to a work session.
We can.
And assuming there's no substantive changes, come
right.
back for a second reading.
Right.
Okay. Now, my next question is, I guess more to you, Rob. Okay, that's going to take us 2 weeks, 4 weeks down the road, and assuming we override the Planning Commission's vote, which would take a 2/3 vote, as I understand it, on our part. Is that correct? What does that do to you in the meantime with your schedule, Rob, or do you need to come back to us sooner than that with a specific request to move forward with your plans?
I'll probably have to come back to you with a specific request for my plans. I was more concerned about the future development of the city and why that ordinance still exists the way it does, because maybe there's somebody else that wants
Right.
to do the same thing. Maybe I have another business down the road and need to do it again. I don't want to have to keep coming back and begging for forgiveness. It'd be better for the community, I think, the business community as well as the whole community, to have something that just made sense for everybody. So I will probably have to come back to you because, if I want to break ground yet this fall, I'm running a calendar issue here. So,
So what you're saying is that we should look for this on the next agenda in 2 weeks. A request from you, is that what I'm hearing then? We'll make sure we get that on the agenda if that's the plan.
yeah, I'm not committing to that today, but it could be.
And I, in my experience in working for the city, this issue comes up over and over again. And people have things they want to do that they can't do the way our ordinance is written. And I'm not sure that it's an appropriate requirement that we have. And that's why I'm bringing it back to the decision makers for you to decide if this is something that we still want to have in our ordinance. And I had put it, the process was it would go to Plan Commission, then it would go to Council for first reading, and then it would go second reading and action. Meanwhile, the Plan Commission didn't pass it the way it was written, which I thought they would. So I thought, well, I'll throw in a work session. And if the council would approve it exactly how it's written, we could move forward that way if there's no substantial change. But now, in hearing that what the Plan Commission had to say about it, we might have some substantial changes. So,
Well, Mayor, if I could point, as a point of privilege, I feel like I didn't do enough at the Plan Commission level to kind of explain things maybe a bit further. To clarify a bit, obviously there's going to be a concern whenever you're talking about the perception of relaxing zoning regulations adjacent to residential areas. But, I think it's important to recognize what it is Section 216303 does currently. It doesn't prohibit loading docks in commercial or industrial, except in I-2. Rather, sub 1 just simply says that no open exterior loading facility shall be located on a street frontage except in I-2. So really, that's a very limited restriction that we're talking about here. Can't be located on a street frontage except in I-2, okay? And then sub 3, which, as proposed, would require that the loading areas be be screened by plant material walls, earth berms, or fences. That would be replacing language as it currently exists that provides that all berths shall be screened from view from the street by plant materials, walls, earth berms, or fences except in I-2. In other words, the berths, which is presumably where the trucks park down in to load into the dock being where the door is and the loading area proper, needs to be screened from view from the street.
So what you're saying is about every approach would have to have an S in it? Is that what you're getting at? So there would be some kind of a...
So the way the ordinance would read right now is that if you have a street that's adjacent to an industrial facility or whatever facility has a loading dock, then the way this ordinance reads is that unless it's in an I-2, unless we're dealing with a property with a loading dock that's zoned I-2, that view from the street would need to be screened. And that's for the berth. Now, the way that this ordinance reads as proposed, it would expand that definition to how loading facility is defined up above. So the view of the loading facility, meaning the dock, berth, and maneuvering area, would need to be screened, but only screened for adjacent residential. So this limits and expands at the same time. It would limit the screening requirement to if the loading area is adjacent to residential areas, those areas need to be screened off. But then it expands it by not saying just berths, but the entire loading area, including maneuvering area.
Well, I can just say from my own personal experience on the Plan Commission and Board of Adjustments, there's, with this current ordinance language as is, there were times when the current ordinance language worked well for us and made sense, but there were a number of times that it didn't make sense and our hands were tied and couldn't do anything about it. And, you know, I think it's something that needs to get looked at. I think it's probably long overdue. We want to be able to accommodate. We want to be able to make things as cost effective for our businesses. But knowing why we need these things and when to apply that is going to be critical. So taking a look at those things, and I'm not sure how you're going to go through the review of it. I think it's a good idea for us to do that and then just see where we can get with it.
It really comes down to like how much space they have. I mean, that should be the bigger deterrent. If it's, you know, a typical semi truck's 52 feet long, the trailer is, plus additional 25 feet roughly. So if they're 300 feet off the road, they should be able to turn around and still have a whole semi load in front of it where they could get out. So, I mean, are you talking of building perhaps to the south of your current facility?
Right. And I guess the issue is, you know, even in I-1, we want to facilitate as much useful space on the lot that we have as possible.
Yep.
And so that prohibits a lot of businesses like myself from building a road out to the back of the building just to put a dock in because you can't have it facing the street. And so I'm saying, you know, for efficiency, for expandability, for the best use of the land, the building, the owners need the ability to put in a dock that faces the street. And in an I-1 industrial park, I just fail to see why that isn't okay.
Yeah, I would definitely limit your future expansion too if you would ever like to do that too. So.
Correct.
We also got to remember that there's a lot of our industries that have two frontage roads.
Yeah.
And so now they've taken 2 of the 4 possible options away. And that's problematic. It is.
And
Well, if that area expands to the east, yeah, then you're essentially hit twice on it.
And I would just only point out, too, you know, the concern about residential properties. I would argue that in many cases this strengthens the protections of properties adjacent to industrial development because here, again, looking at the entire loading area, anything adjacent to a residential area under the proposed language would receive this buffering. Whereas, as it sets right now, the berths shall be screened from view from the street. Let's say, you know, and I don't think there's an example of this, but in theory, if there wasn't a street separating I-1 from residential, and there may very well be circumstances where that's the case, there wouldn't be any screening required. And this would ensure that there is.
So you're adding the screening even if it's on a side, if there's residential property, not on a frontage, but
That's correct.
on a side or a rear? All right, there's no action required on that. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 5. First reading of ordinance number 17-33, amending chapter 21.80 and 21.90 of the revised ordinances of the City of Watertown to update the sign code. Justin?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, this has come at the end of a rather long and laborious process, and it may not be the end. It's certainly the council's prerogative to make additional changes. The Plan Commission had this before them here on August 10th, and with the exception of a few revisions, did recommend it unanimously. I'll get to those revisions here, the specific ones that the Plan Commission called out, but I will try as quickly as possible to go through some of the higher points, and if you have any questions, feel free to stop me. As we scroll down here, one of the first changes you'll see, 218004 sub 1, we expanded out and revised there the graphic illustrations, cleaned them up a bit, but mostly did 2 things. We had the stringer of pennants there defined, which is important. I'll touch on that below. But we added feather signs or feather flags because those are going to be added to the list of prohibited signs. And so we wanted to make sure there was a graphic illustration of that as proposed. Scrolling down further, sub 6 of section 218004 depicts the Clearview Triangle. And the substance of the Clearview Triangle is more granularly dealt with further on, but this is the visual depiction. You'll notice that it has expanded from 15 as depicted in our current ordinance to 20 feet. There was discussion during the public and internal meetings about expanding it as far as 25 feet, and 20 was arrived at as a compromise position. Section 218005 and 8006 have effectively been combined here in the proposal. One of the key themes, as I noted in the memo, is that there is a need to streamline the administrative provisions, cut down on size. There is some redundancy there in these administrative provisions. And really, when it comes to the administrative official, being that this is in Title 21, the administrative official's responsibilities and role are already greatly defined earlier on in Title 21 as Ken Buchholz, our building official's responsibility. So there wasn't as much of a need to go into this in depth. Moving on to 218007, the sign permits provision, still dealing with an administrative concern here, but this is where we start getting into the meat of the changes to our substance. Specifically, if you go to sub 7, sub A, subpart 2, which would be sort of at the top of the page there. Do we have that? Yes. So the language defining when a permitted sign permit would cease or would lapse, currently in ordinance it reads that it would lapse at the end of 180 days from the point at which the business activity was ceased on that premises. Now the thought here of expanding it to 365 days is to essentially ensure that our sign code regulations comport to our nonconforming use provisions in ordinance, basically viewing them as one and the same. If you continue using your nonconforming use, obviously you can be grandfathered, even though ordinance changes in perpetuity as long as you use that particular nonconforming use. But if you stop using it, you have 365 days before that then lapses, and no one can ever use that nonconforming use again. The same thought here would then apply with signs. If the business activity ceases, you have 365 days until then that permit automatically lapses and it cannot be renewed. Under removal of signs, subpart 9, we have a key point that was brought up by our building official, and that there didn't seem to be any kind of issue with the public meetings that we had. The thought there is that the administrative official would have the ability to go out and basically seize temporary non-portable signs that are unlawfully placed. So they are prohibited signs, say out in the boulevard, shouldn't be there. The administrative official would have the ability to summarily take those signs, obviously notifying the landowner of the fact that the sign has been removed by the building official and can be then obtained at City Hall. The thought there is that summary abatement is permissible in this context because we aren't denying these individuals a due process right. We aren't destroying property. We are simply taking it for safekeeping, which they can then obtain when they have the time. The thought is that this is going to allow for the administrative official to aggressively deal with truly prohibited signs, and that summary removal won't offend due process again because the sign isn't being destroyed, it isn't being taken, it can be obtained by the landowner, whenever they have a chance. 218008 and 218009 are
Justin,
consolidated.
can I just interrupt just for 1 second?
By all means, sir.
So you come and take my sign,
Mm-hmm.
and you said they can come and get it whenever they have time.
Correct.
Shouldn't we put some kind of time frame on there that said if you don't claim it in 30 days, it's history?
I think that's a fair
I mean,
concern.
some period of time.
Sure,
But, yeah, and 30 days seems like ample time after they've been notified that. But we should have something that says, look, you got 30 days, otherwise it's going in the garbage. Otherwise, you're holding yourself up to.
That's true. I mean, the flip side of it, as I noted, the due process concern is in taking and possessing, and the ultimate form of possession is destruction. So, if that enters into the mix, and I see it your way too, Councilman, that, I mean, obviously if we get aggressive enough, City Hall could be stuck chock full with signs potentially. But that sort of begs the question of how much time do we then give those individuals to come here and obtain their signs again? Is it 30 days? Is it 60 days? How much notice do we need to provide them?
What do we do when they haul my car away? How many days do they have before they can just get rid of it? I mean, there's got to be something.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to give you that information offhand.
Right.
I don't know.
I'm just, there has to be the allowance of
Sure.
Look, you don't come get it, it's abandoned, or you don't care, one or the other. My recommendation is you put something in there that
Okay.
doesn't leave it into, otherwise we'll be building storage sheds and having signs in them.
I think that's a very good point, Councilman. I think that has a great deal of merit. Let me just type that in here real quick as we're discussing it. Okay. So continuing on, the rest of these provisions here, the big items, so we consolidated the appeals process. Under sign installer's license 218010 sub B, or sub 2 sub B, there's an exception for not requiring sign installers for a certain type of very basic sign, basically a recognition that if the sign is basic enough and falls under these four qualities, being a wall sign that is not illuminated, and that should read self-illuminated, that has a sign area of 32 square feet or less, and that has a flat face, that's a basic enough sign that doesn't require a sign installer because you don't have structural concerns, you don't have electrical concerns, and that's kind of the thinking there. Under design and construction, that was clerical changes just meant to consolidate all of those provisions down below into sub 1. They're basically all derivatives of separate building codes, and they're just all referenced there instead of elaborated down below. Under 2180.12, sub 5, the thought there is, again, getting to when should a sign be considered lapse to the point where you had a permit, you no longer have a permit, or in this case, you have an on or off premise sign and the business or activity is terminated. The thought there is if you are using the sign to sell or lease or rent the property, as long as the sign isn't inaccurate, meaning that it's still advertising the old business that no longer exists, the sign is still considered to be a valid sign advertising something on the premises, and therefore the sign should not lapse. The permit should not lapse, making it a prohibited sign. And I guess we could almost be here all night if we to go through some of these, but exempt signs, we have incidental signs defined in 2190 as proposed. Basically, that helps to consolidate a number of these exempt sign types. They're signs that direct people, like drive-through or entrance here. They don't advertise anything, so they fall under a category of what we call exempt signs, meaning you don't need a permit for them, but you need to make sure that the signs otherwise follow our ordinances. Banners we have under here as exempt signs. as defined below. There's another separate section dedicated to those. Temporary political signs are clarified. We're talking only about the signs that you put out in your yards. They're the flimsier signs that are smaller, limited to 32 square feet or less, that advertise a political candidate. And we clarify that temporary signs for nonprofit institutions or public institutions are permitted generally, given these provisions. Before, there was some conflict. Well, there exists some conflict when you have private denoted, but not nonprofit. Potentially, commercial interests could simply put up a plethora of temporary signs in their in their business area and fall under this provision. So prohibited signs haven't been expanded too much except to include feather signs, and there have been some additional regulations placed upon vehicle trailers or vehicles that are essentially parked in driveways and for all intents and purposes are used as signs, not as daily use vehicles. So the thought is to get those under they're either prohibited signs or they're going to be viewed as temporary signs, depending upon the nature of their display. Parasitic signs are an important prohibited sign that has been added here. That's defined further in 2190, and we can get to that here at the very end. I'm going to try to get through as fast as possible. 2180.22 added the regulation of electronic message centers. Those are signs that move, essentially, electronic signs that show motion, various colors are lighted. That's what we're getting at there. Regulation of portable signs. There have been a number of increases in regulation, and there's a notable relaxing of regulations here. Sub 2 gets rid of the portable sign off-premise advertising ban and allows for off-premise portable signs. However, there are a slate of regulations, additional regulations, such as being prohibited from being located within a right-of-way and within 10 feet of a curb, must be at least 20 feet from any abutting property line unless that abutting property owner consents in writing to its placement there. The requirement that portable signs must be separated by another portable sign not less than 200 feet, and failure to obtain a portable sign permit results in a double fine or double permit fee. The regulation of off-premise signs, you'll note that there haven't been too many suggested revisions here. The one change is in the double billboards, the conditional use provision here in sub 3. As it stands right now, you would be allowed by conditional use to have off-premise signs up to 672 square feet, which is essentially double of what is allowed otherwise under ordinance. So this makes it into a variance. And keep in mind, all these provisions can be varianced by the Board of Adjustment. And this ordinance change would get rid of the Sign Code Board of Appeals as being viewed as something of a separate body. The thought there is that this is considered a decision. All the enforcement provisions here are the decision of a building official, Ken's decision effectively. Ergo, appeals of his decisions would go before the Board of Adjustment. So these appeals are all to a Board of Adjustment, not to the Sign Code Board of Appeals. Because as it stands right now, the Sign Code Board of Appeals is just the Board of Adjustment. So we clarify that. One thing I wanted to note here and ask your consideration of is 2180.26. This section lists the only types of signs that are permitted within boulevards, permitted within right-of-ways in the city. And the question that I put to you is whether, number one, this should be the extent of those signs, and number two, whether there is a stomach to enforce this provision, if in fact these 4 signs are the only types of signs permitted within boulevards. So, food for thought.
And specifically, what are the differences from what was versus what's being proposed now on that?
So there's nothing in terms of differences. What I bring this up for is the fact that there appear to be a number of temporary signs that exist on boulevards in rights-of-way within the city that wouldn't fall under any of these four categories. And the question is, does the city need to go after those signs, or do we need to provide exemptions for them within 218026?
And getting at like roofing signs and realty signs.
Yeah,
What do they call
I asked
that?
Ken to come up here because I will tell you something. I went down Highway 212 on Saturday and I almost was claustrophobic with signs this last week. It was unbelievable. They had the farmer's market. Now you've got melons for sale. You got corn for sale. You got, good Lord knows what you've got for sale. You've got 4 or 5 or 6 pizza signs on Marcos on there that are just, this seems like the same sign on their boulevard. It just goes on and on and on and on and on. And the roofing signs are all over in the community now. Siding signs are all over. That whole bunch, are those permitted today, or are these things that it looked terrible?
No, the ordinance hasn't changed whatsoever, but like I said, it's been the enforcement of the
It's
ordinance.
unenforceable, maybe.
And basically, you got to go all the way back to political and real estate signs that have always been allowed there, and that's if the enforcement. That's what he's asking. Do we want to take political and retail signs out, or do we want to keep everything out of the boulevard and just start enforcing it?
And just to clarify, I mean, this would only eliminate the boulevard as a placement. You could just move it across the sidewalk, and in a number of instances, it would be lawful under our existing ordinance. So it wouldn't, remove an entire cottage industry overnight. But are there other signs like these roofing signs, Ken, that, have been put out for longer than they should under existing ordinance?
Well, other than on the weekends, the rummage sale signs are just driving me crazy.
And those, I think, those are the ones I have problems with. Is I'm okay with a for sale sign on a real estate sign in a boulevard. I don't have a problem with that. But when it's sold, I don't want to see it there for 60 days with a sold little banner across the side of it or a sale pending. If it's sold, now we've shifted from being its purpose of identifying that item for sale. Now we're advertising, and that's not what the intent is. And the same thing is with roofing and siding. If you're working on my roof and you want to put a little sign out there, I don't care. But as soon as you're done with my roof or my siding, it goes away, because now I'm advertising beyond. I mean, that it just seems. I'm okay with them for their actual and real intent, but
I'd
not
love
beyond
to
that.
comment on that part, but I just don't really want to do it right now.
What do other cities do, Ken?
Pardon?
What do other cities do on this?
Well, when Stanton came from Rapid City, he said they didn't allow anything in the right of way. So, but other ones I haven't investigated yet. I'd be happy to go out and find some more information for us. I can send out a query to my other cohorts around the state and get their opinion on it.
Well, I'll just echo Mike's comments. They're everywhere. I mean, they're just proliferating.
Some of this
And
community.
that's why the one section we just put in there is that we can just go pick them up now. Is in there, so we don't have to. I mean, like the real estate signs, those roofing signs. I mean, you call those guys, you tell them one day, and they're right back the next day. I mean, I could spend 2 people full time just going around picking them up and putting them back down. The only good thing about that is in 6 months it'll be done and I'll be gone. At least that issue of it will.
I about cringed when it started to hail this morning. But, well, I think it's one thing to go around and pick up signs. It's another to have a penalty behind it. Because if I've got a roofing company and you come tell me I got to have my sign out of there when my job's done, and I'm putting them back, then I better know that there's an effect that could take place with that.
But right now, if they've done the job, they're allowed to put it on the site during the job, and they're allowed to leave it up for 14 days afterwards.
With a permit?
No.
Why? Who said they can leave it there for 14 days? Okay,
Our current
then maybe we
ordinance.
need to change that. Why would we do that? Why? I don't understand
We can take
that.
them out altogether. That'd be fine
Yeah.
with me.
I'm okay with them for their purpose. But their purpose is gone once the job is done. It's gone when the house sells.
Well, when they're on the job, you can see the truck and the trailer and everything else has already got their name on there. Why do they need another sign in the yard? So
And I think there's got to be some discussion about that part of this, because it just gets to be a mess sometimes.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing this coming back in a work study before it goes to the final two.
And just to add, it may seem out of sorts. Obviously, per state statute, the only requirement in terms of how these ordinances process, is that there be 5 days between a first and second reading, and that you must have a second reading in order to pass an ordinance. The reason why this is being suggested here is, with both ordinances tonight, we're dealing with ordinances that came before the Plan Commission, and so they're going from the Plan Commission to the City Council without having a work session in between. That's generally been the practice in the past, to my understanding. So, that's kind of why we have this issue. So. In terms of the other provisions here, the rest is pretty straightforward. It's clarification. Table 1 includes the R2A and RG district. They hadn't been denoted in that table before. Table 2 has been clarified to show that, if you go over 500 feet of frontage or 200 feet of frontage, depending upon the zoning district, you get an additional sign. That hadn't been clarified prior. And then finally the definitions. We clarify the definition of abandoned sign as excluding a blank sign that otherwise shows no reasonable indication of a lack of maintenance. That is to provide for signs that folks don't want to use to advertise the sale, the lease, or a sign that they don't want to have inaccurately depict a business that no longer exists, but they still maintain it. The thought being that an abandoned sign needs to be removed, but if it's maintained and if it still keeps its aesthetics, there isn't as much of a justification for removing it. And electronic message centers, key terms are defined there. Incidental sign, like I mentioned above, is defined. Parasitic sign, a prohibited sign, is defined as 3 types of signs therein. Temporary sign, per the Plan Commission's suggestion, had added that additional substance there at the end. So beyond that, if you have any questions.
Well, thanks to Ken. I appreciate you coming up. And Justin, I know both you guys did a lot of work on this, so thank you guys very much for that.
Justin or Ken, I'd be interested to know who were some of the individuals that were involved in getting us to where we are with this? If you wouldn't mind sharing who's been working with this.
Sure. We had a number of individuals at an early stage. Luke Muller with First District helped us conceive of some early concepts, and then we moved quite substantially away from those initial thoughts. Internally, with help from administrative staff, Shane, Brandy, Keith. We had, who else?
It was Mike and Bruce.
Oh, yeah.
John Stonebarger,
yep.
And then 2 or 3 gentlemen from various sign.
There's
Mark Stein and
sign companies were represented.
And,
John Wisemantle
Wisemantle
with the portable signs. We had a few individuals from the community come in at one-off times. There was an individual from the roofing industry who came in concerned about the roofing sign, construction sign issue. And I think Bob Fox, was it from the county? Yeah, he was there for a few of the meetings. So we got a decent amount of representation, but I think it's also fair to say that besides city council personnel, or city personnel and city political and appointed officials, that there was a good amount of sign industry folks, and there were some other public folks involved, but that's kind of the breakdown.
Do you get any sense as to how this stacks up compared to some of the similar sized cities in the area? Do you have any comparison done or anything along those lines?
Not necessarily. I think we're driven by the needs, the exigencies of what we have in this community, and I think it's fair to say we relied heavily upon what we currently have in ordinance.
Yeah. And that's the way you should have proceeded, but just curious.
Yeah.
Any further questions? Thank you, Justin. We'll move on.
So just point of clarification, will this come back to us for a second reading next go round, or are we going to look at a work session?
I'd be happy to put this on a work session if you think that would be beneficial, Ken. It sounds like we need to do that.
Absolutely can do that. Yep.
Okay, item number 6 is first reading of ordinance number 17-34, amending section 13.0303 of the revised ordinances of the City of Watertown to conform city fireworks permitting with state law. Justin?
Thank you, Mayor. I won't belabor this too much. The comments, the comment bubbles that appear on the public version of this ordinance, I think succinctly describe what's going on here. It's basically to conform to state statute. That's where all these revisions come from. And, there is the additional element of the fire chief or chief's designee providing that sort of technical support to the council's decision to approve or not to approve a permit. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Dan, do you want to say a few words? Please state your name for the record.
I'm Dan Roddershot, and I'm the owner of Lou's Fireworks here in Watertown. And let me start off first with, I promised the mayor when I spoke with her today that I would be very brief because I know you guys have had a long day. Can I pass out, I should have had copies for all of you. I've got 2 extra copies here, but it's just going to be what I'm going to go over. And you guys can keep it, pass it around, whatever, just so you've got, because it's going to be a little dry. It's going to talk a lot about codified law, however you want to say it. And I just wanted to help explain it the best I can from the industry side. Okay, thank you. I've got a copy. Yeah, thank you. Okay. This is my copy here. I'll let you have this one. You want to take this one?
Do you see what we're doing here? This is your hand.
Oh, okay. Got you.
You gotta scoot over a little for me. Then he'll zoom into it so we can read it a little better. Too much, Pete. Okay.
This is the one you got on camera. Okay. Good. Yeah, good. Should I go ahead and proceed? Okay. First of all, let me tell you, my original setting in on last council meeting was actually to address a completely different issue. I was just going to maybe comment a little bit on the discharge of fireworks at Lake Compesca during the 4th of July. But as I sat here and observed that there is some confusion on the South Dakota codified law, and because I knew that there was an opportunity here that the city wanted to take a look at the permit process and define, how they want to do this going forward, I thought it would be important now that I try to bring at least what we understand from the industry side, what these laws actually mean. And please understand the South Dakota Codified Law compared to, or relating to fireworks, the 3437 has kind of been like my Bible for the fireworks industry the last 50 years. Granted, it started with my dad. But this is kind of the law that we've had to know fairly well because, I mean, it dictates and rules everything that we do. So if everybody's got a copy, I'm just going to breeze through this first part. And like I say, if at any time anybody would have any questions for me at any time, they can call me at the store. But I wanted to have this in front of you so you know a little bit where our concerns are. First off, a private display. And I saw some of this in the last council meeting that was addressed. It's actually not addressed specifically in the South Dakota Codified Law. And only in approximately the last 10 years have we seen an increase in consumers putting on smaller shows for special events. And this is mostly because of newer popular products like 500-gram cakes and 60-gram artillery shells. You know, as the industry has changed, the quality of fireworks has really improved, and the power of the consumer fireworks industry has really changed. And so years ago, you didn't see people wanting to go out and just take Roman candles and bottle rockets and try to put on a show. But as the industry's changed, a lot of the consumer fireworks are the quality that you can put on a pretty decent consumer show. So for that reason, it's why the law has not really kept up to date, or it does not address it clearly today. And for the most part, only public displays, 1.3G, were performed. Let me just give you just a real little summary here first. Consumer fireworks are 1.4G. That's how they're classified now since the early 1990s. They don't go by consumer or by Class C fireworks. That's what they used to be called. So 1.4G, and usually the use of them, the terminology that's used in the codified law is discharge, not display. When you get to a city show, like what we would shoot at the Redland Arts Center, something like that, that is 1.3G fireworks. And that changed at the same time that the 1.4G back in the early 90s. And that's called display fireworks. So anytime you see the word display, that is not consumer fireworks. That's the reference to display fireworks or the stadium-style fireworks. Now, just a couple things under number 2. A South Dakota display permit is what the state requires for any 1.3G event or the city show, private or in a public setting, and that's referred to in the 343713. A South Dakota display permit is also, or I believe should be, required for any 1.4G or consumer fireworks event when executed outside of normal permitted selling times, private or in a public setting. And as I'm sure you're all familiar with, permitted selling times for consumer fireworks, or 1.4G, are June 27th through July 5th. And then discharge is allowed through the 343716-1 through the following Sunday after the 4th. And the reason this was done, it actually, I think, is in 2013, I believe, was the law, when the law changed on that. Is there 13 or 15? But this was done for the main reason that some families can't make it home to celebrate with their families when the 4th of July lands in the middle of the week. So I'm in Sioux Falls. I have a job. 4th of July hits on a Wednesday. My mom and dad have a lake cabin out at Lake Kempeska. You know, I might not be able to make it home the 4th of July to celebrate with them. And so the reason the state changed this law, now this is not local, but this is state, they changed it to go to the following Sunday after the 4th of July. So 4th of July hits on a Wednesday. They allow the discharge through the following Sunday. And it was an effort to work with the general working public is why they did that.
Say, Dan.
Yes.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
I'll go back one paragraph.
Okay.
Where you said a South Dakota display permit is, and then slash should be. Is it, or is that your opinion?
In my opinion, it should be.
Okay, so it isn't today.
It isn't today.
Okay.
Yep. And in my opinion, and I'll kind of summarize this at the end, but right now it is not. It's not required. the South Dakota display permit. The other time of the year that you can shoot fireworks, of course, is the new winter season that started a few years ago, December 28th through the January 1st. And in response to, Mayor Thorson's change and adjustment last year for the Lake Compesca situation, I don't know whether he knew this or not, but in a sense, he was kind of following along what the state saw as an important thing, and that being that sometimes when that 4th hits in the middle of the week, in an effort for families to be able to celebrate, it's nice to be able to have a little longer time frame to do that. So what Mayor Thorson did, excuse me, was the 4th of July hits on a Wednesday, but he thought, okay, let's make it so at least that weekend before the 4th of July, the Saturday, Sunday, they had the opportunity to discharge fireworks. So in a sense, it kind of mirrored what the state saw as an important thing. And Mayor Thorson and I never had that discussion. I didn't know that was even coming, but I thought it made good sense because I thought it did follow, what the state did for discharge of fireworks. Watertown's a little unique in this way, but they have developed their own, get my hands over top of it. They've developed their own permit based off of what is the South Dakota display permit. Now, right now I work with 2 different permits in Watertown. I have a county permit and I have a city permit. And I guess with your permission from the council and mayor, I would like to take, right now I've got 3 forms here. I've got a state permit, I've got a county permit, I've got a city permit, and where I think we have some real problems is the language is all a little different. And I would like to put something together that would communicate clearly on one permit, what we're trying to do here to allow the use of fireworks. And I'm also working with the state on their permit currently. I will be on that issue. But I just want to make sure the language is clear. So when everybody sees when you see a permit in front of you, as going forward, if the city council is going to make a decision on this, I just want to be very clear. Is this in a public, is it a private setting? Is it a consumer fireworks show or a 1.4G? Is it a 1.3G or display fireworks show? Should insurance be required? There's a lot of things. And I think if you would allow me just to maybe spend some time with the fire department and the police department, I would like to sit. I have done a little work with Chip at the fire department, but I'd like to sit down with 2 of them, maybe in a meeting, and come up with one permit that we could use for county or city going forward. So the South Dakota display permit, the one that I have up here, the one we used for many years before Watertown designed their own here a few years back. But my understanding is it was probably created in 1949, and I'm sure I know the party that did that. They were in the display business. But so it's, at least for my understanding of over 40 years, it's been around for a long time. And when written, if you look at the South Dakota 34, 37, 13, when it's written, here's a couple things you'll notice that will help clarify its original intent. Only 1.3G fireworks is really addressed in there, and which are known as display fireworks. In support of this understanding, you'll see in that law that it mentions that the display must conform to the NFPA 1123. And I don't have any fire department people here tonight, but the NFPA 1123 only deals with display fireworks, or the kind of fireworks, the high-powered fireworks that you see out at like the Redland Center. And so that piece that's inserted in there is a clear understanding to me that it only pertains to that, and that's its original intent. And all that to say, Justin, I know you, not being in the industry, a lot of this is probably a little bit Greek because you don't deal with it every day, but in fairness to your understanding on that, unfortunately what's happened is the South Dakota codified law here hasn't kept up. The terminology hasn't changed with the industry as it's gone, so I wouldn't expect anybody to understand that unless they've been doing this all their life. So we need to get the South Dakota law up to speed, and I think right now I've got about 5 or 6 different changes that I'm going to be meeting with the State Department on just to bring it up to today's time. So a correct understanding of the 34, 37 16 would be this, that this does not address displays or 13G fireworks. What it does address is consumer fireworks, and when it is permissible by all consumers to discharge throughout the state. Anytime you see consumer fireworks listed, they don't use the word display, but it's always discharge. So you'll see that a few different times throughout the law, but that's just when Brad's going to go out on the 2nd of July and go, purchase some fireworks, he can go out and shoot them, and that 34, 37, 16 tells him when he can do it, and but it just addresses consumers. And I've already kind of touched on number 4, but that's a terminology used throughout the law there that. Excuse me. Yeah, that's discharge. So bottom line. Thank you. The bottom line would be this, and my only purpose for being here really, not only to comment on the Lake Compesca issue, but is just to help you folks be able to make the best decisions you can by understanding what is the actual law that's on the books now, and whether anything needs to be better communicated. But some terminology in the South Dakota codified law is outdated, and we have already addressed this with some of our state legislators. Brock and Lana Greenfield are retailers of ours out in the Clark area, and so they've, different times I've worked with them out in Pierre when different fireworks issues have come up, and we're going to help them. We're going to ask them to kind of help us clarify this on a statewide basis, so the state permit will be correct, and then hopefully next year, when you see this South Dakota codified law in front of you, we'll be all talking the same thing, and it'll be very clear. That would be my desire. So, and I just put on here that I felt this clarification is needed now in order to have clearly written standards going forward. And I recognize this at the last meeting as there's an item on the agenda that we believe was explained incorrectly on whether a display was public or not, and that if it was public, permission would be granted. And this is something we would believe our law does not or mean to address. So bottom line would be this. Our understanding would be if a display, the big stuff, or a discharge, the consumer stuff, is desired by any of our local residents, that a current display or discharge permit from the city, the county, or the state would suffice. Consumer or display, public or private. And so I think I could do it really simply on a form and make it very clear what type of show it is, what type of fireworks it is, and whether it's in a public setting or whether it's in a private setting. In my mind, I don't think it really matters if it's in a public setting or a private setting, as long as the standards are, followed. That so far from, the general public, so far from a house, gas stations, there's all these different things that you want to have setbacks from. As long as we're following that, public or private, I don't know that it's an issue. So the last thing, the Lake Compesca residents. I know this is something that you guys had to wrestle through a few different probably comments from some of our constituents. But here's what I think would be important, and you can consider this, but I believe the residents at Lake Compesca would be best served now this is only when the 4th of July lands in the middle of the week, to allow that weekend before the 4th of July and the day of the 4th of July the opportunity to discharge their fireworks. Now, so what I would mean, let's say 4th of July hits on a Wednesday this coming year, to allow them to shoot or discharge fireworks on Saturday and Sunday, but not Monday and Tuesday, but then on the 4th again. So they'd have that weekend, and the reason being, there's a lot of people that can't come home or can't be together with family when the 4th hits in the middle of the week, and that's the reason the state, I believe, did this a few years ago, in order to allow families that opportunity to be together to do that. And
Dan?
Yes.
Are you talking Wednesday only? What if it lands on Tuesday? You're talking Wednesday only.
Okay, if it was on a Tuesday, Don, my recommendation would be that you'd let Saturday and Sunday, and Monday would be off limits. So whenever the 4th would hit, like on a Tuesday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Yep, well, it would hit on that. Yep. So I'm just trying to think if the 4th hits on a Friday, of course, they can actually already, it's something to be considered. I mean, statewide, you can discharge fireworks on Saturday still. Well, actually, you can shoot them through the following Sunday. But even if the 4th hits on a Friday, yeah, I guess it'd be something that could be considered. So mostly when it hits in the middle of the week, but what this would do is put a good parameter around the discharge time, as well as I mentioned, it parallel the intent of the state law right now. And it's mainly to accommodate the working public. And one good thing, I don't have I guess Scott is here. Yeah, Scott's still here. One thing I think this would do would reduce some of the fireworks being shot in town too. I really believe that would happen if you just have it the 4th of July the way our old law was, where they could just 4th of July hits on a Wednesday, and they can only shoot it on Wednesday. I don't know. I feel like it would eliminate some of the discharge going on in town, and I think that would be a good thing. We've never agreed with that. We don't like that either, because any roof fire is a bad reflection on our business, so we're not for that either. But I know what happens. I know it's sometimes hard to enforce, but if they did have that opportunity to do that maybe on the Saturday, Sunday, I think that would be a good thing. So I guess bottom line would be that if you guys would be okay with this, I would like to sit down with our fire department and our police department and summarize and put together one permit that would be very simple and clear, and one that we're also going to try and make sure the terminology matches with our state law as we go to the legislation this next year. But we'd put it back in front of you and let you look at it and see what you think. So I'm open for questions if there's any other questions.
So what you're suggesting then is that the ordinance, the first reading that we've got in front of us now, we would in effect table that or scrap that for the time being until you have a chance to work with the parties that you're referencing, Dan?
Glenn, I think I could really simplify your life if you just, I really do. If you'd let me just put this together with a couple, the fire department and police department, I think I could really simplify it. And also for the county commissioners, when I get a permit for something outside the city limits, it'd be nice that they've kind of got the same permit process that we have right now for the city. And also, if all of a sudden it's outside Cottington County, if I have a show outside in Bradley, South Dakota, it'd be nice that our state law, our state permit would also mirror what we're doing here in Cottington County or in the city of Watertown.
One thing, if I could, Council, to add, as I pointed out in the margin there, the way that this ordinance currently reads is there would effectively be no reason, if this were to pass, to have a discharge or consumer side to a permit, because either the display portion, the 1.3G, would come before the council at any time during the year for a permit, or the non-display, your consumer, your discharge, to utilize the terminology brought up by Mr. Rottershot, would be allowed automatically around the lake during those certain times already denoted in ordinance. So that, as I pointed out, would be the effect of this language. But beyond, some of the comments that Mr. Rottershot made, I think that absolutely, what he's saying makes some sense with regard to how the language in statute does not comport with what's provided in national standards, be it the National Fire Code 1123 or what have you. There seems to be that similarity in language, display, but I guess I would really like to see some clarification in law before advising you to really change course. But I think it is important to point out that, yes, as it sets right now, if this were to be adopted, there wouldn't be a permitting process for consumer discharge of fireworks. It would just be allowed around Campesca for those select days.
On those certain days.
Correct.
So I think what I'm hearing, please correct me if I'm wrong, you'd like to revise our permit so that it's consistent with the state and county permit, and I fully support that. And that's not what we're doing tonight. We're not talking about the permit. We're talking about our ordinance, and the nothing that we've written needs to change, because we're only talking about those public displays, the big display. That's the only thing that we would permit at any time other than the allowable times that we already established. So
Correct.
we can continue forward with this.
Mayor, if I can add, I think, like say the last council meeting I was at, the one permit that was approved, and have no problem with it at all because we do those kind of shows, but that was a consumer display, 1.4G, outside of the regular discharge time for consumer fireworks.
If that was a consumer
It was
display,
consumer.
it was illegal,
Well,
Yeah.
actually,
because those can't be permitted outside those.
well, to clarify, and I think this gets to Mr. Rottershot's point, is state law isn't specifically clear on that point. We have the phrase public display in law, and while there are some language similarities between the framework in like NFPA and in the 1.3G versus 1.4G display utilized throughout, it's not specified in statute that there is this qualitative difference between display fireworks and consumer fireworks, with one applying to 3437.13 and the other one applying to 3437.16 and 16.1. So I think that's the issue, is state law isn't to the level of specificity that Mr. Rottershot is speaking of. So at this point, while there may be some truth to what Mr. Rottershot said, in terms of whether we can say state law prohibited that approval, I don't think we can. I mean, what is a public display? I think the city council agonized over that at the last session, and came to a common, reasonable understanding of what a public display is. And what Mr. Rottershot's talking about is an industry-specific distinction that isn't built into statute.
This statute does not, address 1.4 or consumer fireworks. It addresses displays, and only because it was written in 1949. For the most part, consumer displays did not take place years ago because the quality of fireworks. I mean, you wouldn't want to, Mike, you wouldn't want to go see a consumer display years ago. Be a couple of Roman candles and a bottle rocket. That'd be about it, and a cone. So, Mayor, I think what would be the wise thing to do, whether it's a public display, whether it's a private display, whether it's a consumer or a 1.4G display or a 1.3 or display, I think it would be important that you have, especially when it hits outside of the retail fireworks discharge season. Okay, let's say next week I wanted to shoot a show out at Lake Compesca. Right now, there is nothing in the state codified law that says, that you can or you can't. And locally, what this permit does, if you just put public display on here, it's just kind of addressing the 1.3. My recommendation would be, I don't care if it's 1.4G or 1.3G, I think you should have a permit process in place for it. So I think you should be the final one that would say, out at the golf course this week, or out at Redland Farms or whatever, you should have the opportunity to say, okay, do we allow this or don't we?
I think that's what our ordinance proposed says.
Well, I guess to clarify, Mr. Rottershot, per state statute, per SDCL 3437.13, there is that requirement that the compliance with NFPA 1123 is realized. Mm-hmm. In NFPA 1123, is there not operator qualifications and licensing? So whereas
in the state of South Dakota, there's no, I don't want to say certification that needs to take place. Some states there are, like the state of Minnesota, state of Nebraska. Yeah, you're talking about for our shooters?
Yeah. So yes, the operators.
Yes, the operators in some states, yes. North Dakota, South Dakota, no.
There's no federal requirement?
No,
Okay.
not at all. The NFPA 1123 does address, setbacks, standards, and all that kind of stuff, but there are no, and like we train about 40 shooters every 2 years.
Mhm.
We have a display training class for this, but there currently are no requirements in the state of South Dakota to have display operators certified.
Sure. And that might be something also to broach with
You
the
know,
state.
and it is something that I think we're going to see in time, and we're sure not opposed to that because we're already training our people and doing that. But I think in time you might see that, Justin. I do. So just once again, I want to keep it really simple, and I understand there's a lot of fireworks terminology I'm throwing at you right now, but my recommendation would be we come up with a permit, whether it's a city show, whether it's out in the county, whether it's 1.4G, whether it's 1.3G, whether it's public or private, that you have a form that's in front of you, and then you can then look at that, and then we have the fire department, which is usually our first level of enforcement code that we pass this to. And if they approve it, then the police department, and then going forward, it'll probably be the city council that'll then sign on the permit in order that it doesn't all rest on your shoulders.
Sarah, it might be, and I'm not sure what the language says in this, but I think the issue of when the 4th falls during the week, well, yeah, actually any time, then I think we do need to probably have a conversation as to when fireworks are allowed. If the 4th is on a Saturday, can I shoot them on Sunday?
Are you talking about at Lake Compescano?
Yeah.
Okay. Currently, the June 27th to July 5th, you can discharge fireworks anywhere in the place in the state of South Dakota, anywhere on the county property or private property if you have permission. And now they have extended it. If that day of the 4th of July hits during the week.
But my question is, does
Sunday.
the city of Watertown's ordinance allow that?
No.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yep.
Yeah,
It
Ours
allows
is tighter.
Yep.
We have the ability to go tighter, not looser.
Yes.
And so my question is, I don't know exactly what the language is in here per some of your discussion, that probably we should have some discussion on what we think it should be. I look at it and I think if it's on a Friday or Saturday or Sunday, let them shoot them. If it's on Friday, they're going to shoot them Saturday and Sunday anyway at the lake. They're going to. So if it's on a Wednesday, I don't like the idea of having them do it and then not doing it and then okay on the 4th, because they're going to do it anyway in between that time. So I think the time frames within our ordinance probably merit some discussion on all our part, I think. Otherwise, we're going to fight a battle anyway.
My goal long term would be that there wouldn't be no fireworks shot in the city, other than a ground fountain or something, a little kid item. And I think if you relax that 4th of July thing just a little bit at the lake, I think you would eliminate some of that's happening in the city. But only, and Mike, I agree with you. It could be a little bit of an enforcement issue, closing down Monday and Tuesday. I do understand that, but if the residents were allowed to do that, and it's maybe you do it on a 1-year test frame, and see how it goes, see how law enforcement handles it, or how the response is. But if we gave them a little bit of freedom and said, okay, you can do it here because we realize some people can't make it home when it hits the middle of the week, but please, respect the rest of the people out the lake and, the opportunity you've been given to have a couple extra days of doing this. But then, once again, some people, I don't think we'd want to take away the 4th of July from allowing them to do it. So
I'm just saying that might be a reason to, and maybe we can do that during the second read, but it does merit some of our discussion, I think.
And I guess part of what I want to avoid happening too is I'd like to get it spelled out in ordinance, because what I particularly didn't like this year was that by mayoral proclamation it arbitrarily got set for a time period something totally different than what we typically had here in Watertown, and I want to avoid that possibility from happening again.
And I think, Glenn, I think there was some wisdom in how the dates were picked, actually, at least including the weekend before the 4th. I'd rather see it before the 4th than after, personally. But I do hear what you're saying, But once again, it's only going to be in those years when the 4th hits in the middle of the week. But I think, you give the residents an opportunity to prove themselves and see what happens. Maybe it's a 1-year trial. But I do think you would eliminate a lot of Scott's issues that probably are happening in the city if there's a little more freedom out there to do the Saturday, Sunday thing. So.
Okay, but I'm still.
You look baffled. Go ahead.
I'm still a little bit baffled
Okay.
because I think that the way that it's proposed will accomplish what we want it to accomplish, which is no longer can the mayor proclaim at any time that fireworks are allowed.
Mm-hmm.
That provision's gone.
Mhm.
And it comes back, it requires a permit.
Mm-hmm.
And
Correct. Yep.
I don't see a problem with
Yeah,
that.
it appears, and maybe I'm mischaracterizing, so Mr. Rottershot, tell me if I am, but his concern was about the permit that was approved the last time being a consumer
Right.
discharge
No, and
firework.
I
and,
agree that.
And the fact is, state statute doesn't specifically delineate, and
Right.
so
Right.
There was
while
a lot
on a
of
certain
confusion
level,
about that.
yes, so
But that's the permit.
that's correct.
That's not the ordinance.
Correct.
The ordinance, I think we can move forward with it because I think it says what we want it to say. And it's not saying that we won't change our permit form.
Okay.
I'm all for changing our permit form
Sure.
because that was very confusing.
Right.
Let's make it understandable and clear.
I want to simplify it, Mayor, that it'd be real easy for you to look at whether it's you or the county commissioners, with city or county permit. And then also I wanted to align real clearly with what our state codified law is going forward. So that way we're all speaking the same language going forward. So.
Right. And I think that what our ordinance is proposed to say is that the council can issue a permit outside of those dates. And that would allow them on a year-to-year basis or whatever to say when. But it would be the council. It wouldn't be the mayor.
Yes.
And so there's no problem with. Are you saying there's a problem with that?
No.
So we
I
could
just
we could move forward with our second.
with whatever, let me bring something that might clarify just that permit going forward, and then you guys can discuss what you want to do as far as the Lake Compesca issue.
This
That's
just says
that's my comments on the Lake Compesca issue that I think might be helpful going forward. But
Because I understand it, this ordinance would still limit the discharge even at Lake Compesca just to the 4th of July.
As well as the time period around New Year's, specifically December 28th, dusk on December 28th through to January 1st.
But the council could issue permits but not for the
You're not going to for the one that
consumer.
has their trunk load full of fireworks and going to go shoot them off. And, I mean, they aren't going to come and get them. And I think that's our biggest
So
problem.
there
I'll be
can't
honest
be-
with you. Our problem isn't the actual planned displays. The problem is
right.
all the other ones that
Right. And that's why I'm hoping a little bit of freedom on maybe that weekend before, which Mayor Thorson had, instituted last year. I do think going forward it might eliminate some of the issues that we face. But
So are you suggesting that we loosen up what we're proposing here for the consumer?
the consumer fireworks at the lake, I would say if you could allow the weekend before, whenever it hits in the middle of the week, the 4th of July, that
And,
she
and
would
you need to define what you mean by middle of the, or what we need to define what we mean by middle of the week, though, too.
Yes, let's say if it hits on if it hits on a Monday, I think actually a Monday through Friday, Glenn, technically, because if it hits on a Monday, they're going to be able to shoot them on the 4th anyway. But would some people have to be back to work on the 4th? Possibly, maybe not. But especially the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, especially those are the ones that would be most important. And then just to allow them that weekend preceding when that 4th hits in the middle of the week like that. So it would be entirely your call. Maybe it's not on a Monday or a Friday. Maybe it's just a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But I do think there might be some wisdom in that. So. The rest of the state is shooting fireworks from June 27th to the 5th of July, and then whenever it hits in the middle of the week till actually in some years the 9th. This year's I think at the 9th of July, but whatever. So that leniency a little bit that the state decided was important a few years ago, when that 4th hits in the middle of the week, is kind of the leniency I'm asking for or recommending for the Lake Compesca area.
Okay,
But it'd be on the front end. It'd be on the front end, the weekend before the 4th. So
it wasn't the intent to do any kind of a change for the consumer fireworks. And this ordinance would be more restrictive than the state, as it always has been.
yes.
The only change we were looking at was taking out the mayoral proclamation
Yes.
allowance
I'm in total agreement with that.
and changing that to council.
Yeah.
But
and
I
now that won't apply.
But my point is, if we're going to open up the ordinance for a review, let's look at it from the consumer standpoint and see what
I
makes
think that
sense.
makes 100%
Yeah.
sense.
I could get something back to you in a few days for your your referral and look at, and I think you could do this rather quickly. But
Well, and we could do that at the public hearing as well.
Okay.
And if the council decides to change it from what's proposed, we might need to do
Sure.
redo our first reading and do another.
currently, I've got I think 6 different issues I'm going to address on the state level this year, just to bring everything up to the current restrictions, whether it's NFPA 1123, 1124. There's just a lot of different regulatory agencies that control our industry, but I want to bring all those up to the most current copies or standards that are there. So we're not dealing with standards that are 40 years old.
Okay. So if you could get that information
I
to
sure
me
will.
soon, and I'll disseminate it, and
Okay.
and we'll decide how to move forward.
that
But
sounds good.
we may just table this for a while, or redo a first reading
Tomorrow
at a
morning.
later date.
Tomorrow morning, I'll try to arrange an appointment with the fire department and the police department and see if we can just hammer it out in a few minutes. I think we could do it. So
Okay.
Yep.
Very good.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Any other discussion before we move on? Would anyone like a break? No? Okay. We'll keep going. Item number 8, resolution number 17-24, dissolving tax increment district number 3, comprising Pheasant Ridge Business Park, after full payment of all obligations.
Mayor, we need number 7 first.
Oh, oops, sorry. I skipped number 7. Let's go back to item number 7, first reading of ordinance number 17-35, amending chapter 7.03 of the revised ordinances of the city of Watertown to update city council procedures and duties. Justin.
Thank you, Mayor. This was dealt with in great length at the prior work session, so I won't belabor this. 3 changes, really all told. The first, minor clerical, changing references to aldermen and making it consistent. All references are now to council members, not just alderpersons, aldermen, all those derivations. The second, more substantive change is the adoption of Rule 28 as proposed. And this would help to clarify the procedure for setting up the agenda. You will notice there are yellow highlighted provisions. Those were what were suggested at the last work session, and they would not only clarify that the mayor is quote-unquote the owner of the agenda by reviewing and approving agenda items, but also provides for sort of a check and balance by allowing council members, 2 council members, to be able to place an item on the agenda. And it also allows a good mechanism for those circumstances where the mayor might be conflicted on an agenda item. There's still a mechanism to get an item on the agenda by the 2 council person convention. So the third change was the addition of 7.0303 as proposed, would list all of the boards upon which the city council member, once selected, would serve as a full voting member. That would eliminate, in the prior iteration had liaison listings, and that has been eliminated from this draft. So,
I've got one question. Do we need a definition of approved? Are we talking verbal, email, written, when we say and approved by the mayor?
I think at this point, Councilman, Generally speaking, if the mayor is not involved in the discussion, I would say that this has been put together consistently by email, and so there will always be some sort of paper trail, if you will. So there will be a recordation of any kind of approval at some point. There would need to be.
Is there a process for removing something from the agenda by either the mayor or council members?
Generally speaking, Councilman, by virtue of the mayor being the chair of the proceeding, of the city council proceeding, as is often the case, or sometimes the case, at the beginning of the city council session, the mayor will motion to have an item removed from an agenda. I don't know if it's been the practice in the past to revise an agenda to remove something prior to the meeting. The thought being that you're in a public setting, there isn't any harm in having it be announced publicly in session to remove an agenda item.
I would like to leave it loose as far as what approved means, so that verbal could be, I mean, a lot of times people are busy and aren't at their computer to send a written email or note that it's approved, and a verbal looks good is fine. That's all I've given. I don't think I've ever written a note saying I hereby approve this agenda, which might be cumbersome if I'm in a meeting or away, or, you know. I don't have any problem with that being loose.
Yeah, I don't see it as an issue either. We don't want to. Let's make this reasonable with what we need. To me, I think approval is approval. I don't care if it's verbal, if it's email, I don't care. It stands up to itself. It'll be fine. The only thing that I don't agree with on Rule 28, though, is there is an assumption within that, based on a lot of our discussion, that the mayor is responsible for this. It does not state it, and I don't know why that's a hard sentence to put in. To me, that's the first sentence. Where does it say it?
It does say that. The proposed agenda for all city council meetings shall be compiled by the finance officer and shall be reviewed and approved by the mayor.
Okay. And I think it's the responsibility of the mayor to ensure that an agenda is established. That's very clear language. And that the finance officer compiles it and that the mayor approves it prior to release.
Well,
to me, that's very cut and dry. We have.
Are you different from what it says?
Mm-hmm.
How is that?
Because it doesn't say in here that the mayor is responsible for ensuring that an agenda is established for the meeting, the council meeting. It does not say that in there.
So, Mike, do you want it shall be compiled by the finance officer and mayor, or just by the mayor?
The mayor needs to ensure that an agenda is established. It's compiled by the finance officer, and then prior to the issuance of it, the mayor approves it.
So are you saying if the finance officer fails to compile an agenda, that it's the mayor's responsibility to get her done?
How can you prove it if you don't get it done? You have to ensure that one gets done, right?
I guess, Councilman, the only point I would say, just from a structural standpoint, legal structural standpoint, if there is a mechanism by which council members can place items on an agenda, then it would appear that there wouldn't necessarily be someone who is, I don't know if the thought is that the mayor is responsible always for putting items on the agenda. That wouldn't appear to be.
That's not what I said.
Okay.
She's responsible in this case for making sure an agenda gets established, not for putting them on there.
Is that in state law? It says that our finance officer has duties, and the agenda is part of it, right?
To notice. If you go to our home rule charter, it says that the
the
finance
state law?
officer is there to notice the agenda. Notice that's a completely different responsibility than making sure that we have an agenda for this meeting. I don't know, I look
don't
at
know
it and
that
I
this
think
has
of
ever
all
been
the
an issue.
conversation that we have had, and we talk about the mayor being responsible for the agenda, but we still don't write it in our document. It's still not written in here. So when we're all dead and gone, or whatever we are, somebody's going to pull this up and say, well, I don't know what it really says. Maybe it does. Some people are going to interpret it as being responsible, and some probably aren't. They're going to say, no, it's the finance officer. I don't understand why it's so difficult for us to say what we want to say.
Well, the physical act of putting together and publishing and posting an agenda is not a duty that the mayor would normally conduct. I don't even know how to post anything on the website. That's something that the staff does. And for the council agenda, it's the finance officer. For the plan commission agenda, it's the engineering department. It's various staff members actually do the physical.
Okay. And I'm not
creation.
asking that the mayor do those things. I'm asking that the mayor is responsible for making sure those things happen, that an agenda gets done. We shouldn't be having the discussion that we had over the last 6 weeks as to who's responsible, when we can write one simple little thing in here and we all know.
I mean,
Am I being too anal on this thing, or what? Because I don't know why that's so hard.
I guess when I look at this, I mean, since the work session, the words "and approved" I can see were added to this verbiage. I mean, to me, I'm perfectly okay with that when we say the mayor has to approve the budget. I guess I'm not sure what more any additional language is going to accomplish in this, Mike.
I guess from a staff standpoint, I would think whatever agenda is prepared, and we're presuming it's reviewed and approved by the mayor, that even silence would indicate a positive response. Because
No, I would disagree with that, because if I haven't seen the agenda, how is that constituting approval? If I'm away from my computer when it comes
staff
out.
leaves at 5 o'clock, if the approval doesn't come till 5:01, it may have to hit send. So if we don't hear something to contrary, we're assuming that our bid or
I
our
think that's
items
a wrong
are.
assumption. That
Well,
would be
I'm
what I
just-
would say is if there hasn't been.
So then is the meeting canceled?
No,
That's what he's
the-
getting at, I think.
If it's not posted or if it's not approved, because it gets approved before it gets posted.
Right, but we have to post it by 5 o'clock Friday.
We have
If-
to post the council agenda by Sunday at 7 p.m. And generally, the agenda has come out, and we've published it by Thursday, well in advance of our legal requirement. Whether or not there was any exchange of, yes, it's approved, no, it's not.
Okay.
That's what we're ironing out here.
Okay.
We haven't been in a time crunch that I'm aware of. I don't want to make this more cumbersome. I think a verbal looks good to me is fine, and I don't think we need to say that. I don't know that we've ever had a problem that there wasn't an agenda created. That's not the issue. And so I don't understand what you're saying, that if there is an agenda, it was created by the finance officer, and it was approved by the mayor or the council. And I'm confused why we need to add more language in there about the mayor being responsible.
Who's responsible?
Well, I think that the finance office is responsible for the actual physical act of putting the agenda together and posting it. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but
So she's the owner of the agenda? He or she?
these are semantics. I think if the mayor
No, they're not.
is supposed to approve it, which is what we're writing here, it was unclear before. I don't disagree with that. It was unclear. So now we're establishing who's responsible for approving what's on it. And we've cleared that up by what is written here.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question. We've talked about this for 15 minutes, when we could add one sentence that states who is responsible. Why is that a problem?
I don't know what it means is the problem.
It's very clear. If it states that the mayor is responsible for ensuring that an agenda is established, you are the owner of it. There's no questions.
Okay.
And I don't want to have to go through what we went through 4 or 5 weeks ago as to interpretation of what our language is saying, when we can clearly identify what we want it to say. Are we saying today that the mayor is ultimately, when the buck stops, who's responsible making sure that an agenda is established? If that's going to be the finance officer, then put it there. This does not say either one of those things.
Okay, this says that the mayor approves it. So if it gets published without the mayor's approval, there's still an agenda, but it wasn't approved. And I think we're arguing about semantics. If that would satisfy you, I think it says the same thing. I don't think we need those extra words, but if that's what you all think needs to be in there, go for it. I don't approve it. You're going to approve the language, not me. I don't know that that's necessary, but if you think it is, that's fine.
I'm okay with what we've got here, is my opinion.
Okay, this was just a first reading, so if between, there's no action to be taken. If you guys think about it, and if you think a change to what's proposed is important and necessary, we can add that, and then we'll decide if it requires another first reading. Otherwise, if you think it's okay as is, we'll just move forward next time with the second reading and public hearing. So that's how we'll leave this one. And I don't mean to be combative, Mike. I'm kind of confused what you meant.
The issue is the amount of discussion that it's taken. We all know what it intends to say because we've talked about it for 6 weeks, right? That's my point. What about those that haven't been involved? Shouldn't it be a little clearer than that? It should be cut and dry. That's my point.
I think it is.
Because no, it doesn't. But that's my opinion. So we can move on.
All right, let's move on. Okay, item number 8, resolution number 17-24, dissolving tax increment district number 3, comprising Pheasant Ridge Business Park after full payment of all obligations. Justin.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a resolution that is required by state statute, specifically SDCL 11-9-46 sub 2, to dissolve what is commonly referred to as a TIF, a tax incremental financing district, but by state law is referred to as a tax incremental district. Tax incremental district number 3, as you read in the whereas clause, was instituted on March 7th, 2005, or at least began the process of instituting in March 7th of 2005, and has eventually worked itself out to being paid back based off of the increments that have accrued over the last decade and 2 years. So this year, the debt obligation, the expense of the public improvements under that tax incremental district was paid off, and so this resolution will start the process. Once approved, the amount that's in the TIF number 3 fund will be sent to the county for proper distribution per state statute to the parties or the governmental institutions that would otherwise receive these tax receipts. So,
okay, thank you. Is there a motion to approve?
Second.
Moved by Solom, second by Vilhauer. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item number 9, consideration of pyrotechnics or open flame permit application for fireworks display at the Casino Speedway on August 27, 2017 during the races. Okay, so this is permit on our confusing permit form, but appears to be a public display that would require approval. According to our ordinance, I could approve it, but I'm asking for your authorization to issue this permit. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Motion by Danforth. Second by Y. Discussion?
I see, Dan, you're nodding your head out there. You're okay with this?
Looks good to me.
You know, for the most part, it's a consumer. Class C is not used as the terminology anymore, but it's a 1.4 if that is used. So it's consumer fireworks. It's outdoor, it's public, that's okay with, public or private, it's okay. Looks like he's got insurance, so I think you guys are covered, so.
Thank you. All right, any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item number 10, authorization for the mayor to sign a contract for professional services for the interim city attorney. As you'll see in the packet, Vince Foley has offered his services as the interim city attorney, and having Judge Foley provide those services is a great benefit, and I'm asking for your authorization to approve the contract. And he did add another memo, which you can see above here, to clarify a couple of the items that were in the council packet. So that his responsibility is to attend the meetings. He'd be attending not just council meetings, but also Board of Adjustment meetings and Plan Commission meetings, which he didn't mention the Plan Commission meetings before. And he had the Justin's last day wrong in the council packet. But he's still going to start on the same day. So I think it's pretty wonderful that Judge Foley has agreed to provide these services, and so I'd like to entertain a motion to authorize.
So moved.
Moved by Solom, Lallam, and second by Roby. Further discussion?
Do we know, or is there a minimum number of hours, or how is
Yeah, he's said in there 60 hours
60?
A month.
That's in person, to clarify. So that means actual attendance in person, whether in office hours or at meetings, board meetings, council meetings, etc.
Okay.
But that does not necessarily account for the amount of time that he would work outside those hours on city council business.
Which would be
business.
added to that.
Correct.
Okay. Do we know how this number relates to the previous interim attorney that we had?
Yes. So the previous interim city attorney obtained a flat rate of, I believe it was $8,000. Let me make sure of that. And so this interim city attorney would obviously be $1,000 above that. I'm not aware as to any amount of required hours in that prior agreement. Here you're getting 60 hours of guaranteed in-person legal advice, which if you break that down, you divide 9,000 by 60, that amounts to about $150 an hour, which, if you look at that in the private practice, private sector, that, given the years of Judge Foley's experience, his experience with the city previously as city attorney, I would say that that's a fairly generous amount for the city.
Just to clarify, he would be working as an independent contractor, is that correct?
Correct, but he would still have all of the attorney-client responsibilities enshrined in our South Dakota Rules of Professional Responsibility. So there would be very little difference in that relationship between what you have with me and what you would have with him.
Shelley, on an annualized basis, this is quite a bit more than what we had looked at as in our budget hearings last week. Any issues there? I mean, let's say that we had to utilize his services for an entire year. That'd be quite a bit more than what we're looking at budgeting for 2018, for example.
Yeah, I guess it all depends on how hard it is to get another city attorney hired, and we just have to look at that at the end of 2018 and determine whether there would need to be a supplement or not. But it really is going to depend on how difficult it is to get one in, and then what that pay is going to be for that person.
Any further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 11, authorization for the mayor to sign amendment number 1 to the FAA grant agreement 3-46-0058-27-2013. Shelley?
I can start out the conversation. If you have any hard questions, ask Todd. Basically, this project went over budget, and when we realized that, we requested the FAA to make an amendment to the grant. They granted that and went ahead and paid us out and closed out the grant, but I'm guessing that the state just kind of forgot this administrative piece of it. So even though the grant's been done, we've been paid, the funds have been dispersed, we do need to have the mayor sign this, and then we do need to have minutes showing that you have authorized the mayor to sign this amendment. So it's kind of a housekeeping matter for this grant, but does need to be done.
Motion by Roby, second by Danforth. Further discussion?
So the bottom line, this is costing us, what, $264 additional? Am I reading this right?
Correct.
Okay.
And it's already paid. So this, like I said, this is just a housekeeping issue. It's not costing you a thing right now.
Oh, good to know. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Item number 12, consideration of change order number 1 to the contract with Timmons Construction for the 29th Street reconstruction project, increasing the contract amount by $17,554.75. Shane?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a brief note for the public. The 29th Street project entails the work between Highway 212 on the north and is bounded by roughly 13th Avenue to the south. And the property adjoining that is Walmart and the surrounding commercial district. The discussion came, this is a project that was awarded to Timmons Construction for concrete paving. And subsequently, we had some discussions about potential issues that may occur, random cracking, where we have load transfers from, we have a lot of truck traffic down there, and when they take corners, it transfers a lot of the load from one set of axles to the other side of the truck. And what happens sometimes in those situations is you'll get a localized stress fracture in the pavement. And so what we did is we discussed where those potential problem areas may be, and the culmination of that was that we would do the first 100 feet south of the intersection of 212. We would isolate the driveway entrances along the west side by Walmart, and then include a slight short section as 29th Street continues off to the south as part of that proposal. So we came up with a estimate of 1,633 square yards where we would increase the pavement thickness from the designed 7-inch thick pavement to increase that by 2 inches to a 9-inch thick pavement. We did review that. It doesn't require any changes in our dowel basket pattern or sizing or anything like that. So this is just simply increasing the thickness of the pavement in those isolated areas. The increased cost is $10.75 per square yard. And the way we set this up was we would actually just introduce a new bid item and measure all the 9-inch stuff and have it funnel through its own bid item rather than do a cost plus thing, which gets kind of ugly. But so anyway, staff agrees with this proposal. We think that it'll help the longevity of the road and functionality of it for an increased amount of time into the future. So it's well worth the $17,000, $554 investment to complete this project.
That's a good deal, isn't it?
Yeah, very good deal.
We have a motion, second. Motion by Albertson. Second by Y. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 13, consideration of change order number 1, final, to the contract with Dunick, Inc. for the 2017 alley and parking lot improvement project, increasing the contract amount $32.94. Shane?
Try not to break the bank on this one. Actually, what this is our reconciling change order, and it's basically we got lucky on our estimated quantities, and the contractor managed to hit those almost exactly. So this $32.94 is just a slight change in quantity, and is a semantical change to the contract.
I can make a motion to approve that.
Motion by Lallam, second by Thorson. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Is there any old business? Is there any new business? Any liaison member reports? Okay, I would like to say this. We're going to go into executive session, but this is Justin's last council meeting. And I want to thank Justin for his dedication and excellent work that he's done for the city of Watertown in the time here. I really appreciate it. I know the council appreciates it. The staff appreciates it, and we're all going to miss you. So thank you for your service, and we all wish you good luck. We will have an executive session this evening in order to discuss and consult with legal counsel on contractual matters and pending litigation. We do not expect to take action when we come out. So I need a motion to go into